I'm Elena Vasquez, 29, a licensed occupational therapist working at a rehabilitation center in Austin, Texas. For 3 years, I wired $1,800 every single month to my parents so they could keep the house. Mortgage payments, utility bills, my mom's prescription copays. I covered it all. A total of $64,800 out of my own pocket, squeezed between my student loans and my own rent across town. But on the day I defended my clinical licensure and threw a small celebration dinner, the one night I'd been working toward for 2 exhausting years, my parents didn't come. No call, no text. When I finally reached my mom, she said, "We're busy, Elena. Don't make everything about yourself." I stood in the parking lot of that restaurant in my good blazer. Phone pressed to my ear and felt something go cold inside me. 30 minutes later, I was on my laptop canceling every automatic transfer tied to their accounts. My dad called before midnight. His voice was shaking. I didn't pick up. I'd spent years convincing myself this was normal, that this was what good daughters did. My parents had bought their house in San Marcos, Texas back in 2003, and when the 2008 crash hit, they refinanced badly. By the time I graduated with my master's degree in 2019, they were behind on everything. My dad was 57 and had been doing HVAC work for 30 years. His knees were going, he said. My mom had part-time work at a dry cleaner, but quit after a flare-up of her fibromyalgia. I understood. I really did. So I set up the wire transfer on the first of every month without being asked twice. What I didn't fully see then was the pattern. The mortgage was $1,100. I sent $1,800. The extra $700 was always absorbed into something I never got receipts for. A car repair. A VIT bill for the dog they got 2 years into me paying their mortgage. A cousin's emergency I never heard about again. When I asked, my mom would sigh like I'd accused her of something awful. "We raised you, Elena. We're not asking for much." And I'd back down. Every single time. My younger brother, Theo, lived 40 minutes away in New Braunfels. He made good money doing sales for a tech company car, annual bonuses, the whole thing. My parents treated his visits like a holiday. My mom would cook for 2 days before he came over. They'd talk about his territory expansions, his new apartment, his girlfriend. When I came over after a 10-hour shift, they'd hand me a list. New weather stripping for the back door. Mom's eye drops weren't covered this month. The water heater was making a noise. I told myself Theo just wasn't as stable. That he'd help more when he settled down. That wasn't true, and somewhere underneath all the exhaustion, I knew it. My boyfriend at the time, Daniel, saw it before I did. He'd sit across from me while I did the transfers and just watch. "You look like someone paying a ransom," he said once, not meanly, just quietly. I laughed it off, but that word stayed with me, ransom. Like if I stopped, something bad would happen to them, or to the version of myself that believed I was a good daughter. My best friend Odessa, a paralegal downtown, was less gentle about it. She'd known my family since college. "Your mom called you twice last week to ask about coupons," she told me over tacos one afternoon. "When's the last time she called to ask how your patients are doing?" I changed the subject. Odessa let me, but her question sat at the bottom of my stomach for weeks. The licensure dinner was my own idea, a small thing. 8 people at an Italian place I'd been saving a gift card for. Daniel, Odessa, a few colleagues from the rehab center. I told my parents 3 weeks in advance. My mom said they'd be there. My dad said, "Wouldn't miss it." I bought them 2 seats at the table with a little card that said "So proud" on the front. The kind of card you find at CVS and feel embarrassed buying but do it anyway, because hope is stubborn. By the time the appetizers came, their seats were empty. I texted, nothing. I excused myself to call from the parking lot, and that's when my mom picked up. She sounded annoyed, like I'd interrupted her. When I said it was my dinner, the night I'd talked about for months, she said, "We're busy, Elena. Don't make everything about yourself." And she hung up. I stood under the parking lot lights for I don't know how long. Daniel came out to find me. He didn't say anything, just put his arm around me, and I let myself feel the weight of it. Not just tonight, but all of it. Every missed call and brushed off conversation and transfer on the first of the month for 3 years. Then something settled in me. Quiet and final. I went back inside. I smiled at my colleagues. I toasted with the people who had actually shown up. And when I got home at 11, I sat at my kitchen table and started canceling things. The mortgage auto-pay, the utility accounts in my name, the supplemental insurance I'd been covering as a favor, one by one, methodically. Like closing tabs on a browser you should have closed a long time ago. It took 45 minutes. Then I blocked their numbers, brushed my teeth, and went to sleep. My dad called 17 times before morning. I know because Odessa told me. I turned my phone face down. The next 3 days were quiet. Then a letter arrived, handwritten in my mom's cursive. She has the kind of handwriting that looks pretty until you read the words inside it. The letter said I was selfish, that I'd always been too sensitive, that she and my dad had sacrificed everything for me, and this was how I repaid them. And then, near the end, you think you can just disappear? We know things about you that could ruin your reputation. Don't test us. I read that twice. Then I photographed it and texted it to Odessa. She called me in 3 minutes. That's a threat, Elena. That's not a guilt trip. That's a threat. We need to document everything. I hadn't been thinking in legal terms. I'd been thinking in family terms, which is a different language entirely and doesn't translate well to the real world. Odessa walked me through what to do. I printed the letter and kept the original. I pulled up 3 years of bank transfers and screenshotted every one. I started a document. Dates, amounts, incidents, the parking lot phone call, the letter. Odessa knew a family attorney named Victor, who agreed to do a consult for low cost. Victor was calm in the way that good lawyers always are, like nothing surprises them. He reviewed the letter, the documentation, the 3 years of transfers. The letter alone could support a harassment claim if they continue, he said. And the scale of financial contribution you've made, that's significant. Did you have any written agreement? I hadn't. Of course I hadn't. Who draws up contracts with their parents? But he told me to keep collecting everything and to be ready. What I didn't know yet was that my dad had already started making moves of his own. I found out through my Aunt Rosaria, my mom's older sister, who lives in Poville and has never liked my parents much, mostly because she spent decades watching my mom treat people badly and getting blamed for noticing. Rosaria called me on a Tuesday evening, cautious, like she wasn't sure if she should be calling. Elena, she said, has anyone talked to you about your grandfather's life insurance? I went still. My grandfather, my mom's father, had passed 4 years before. I remembered the funeral, the drive to San Antonio, the folding chairs in the heat. What I didn't know, what no one had told me, was that he had left a beneficiary designation naming me and my cousin Fia equally on a $60,000 life insurance policy. Rosaria had found out by accident, going through old papers in her own attic. She'd called the insurance company to ask about her own paperwork, and a representative had mentioned, almost in passing, that a claim had already been processed on the policy 2 years ago. The claim had been submitted by my mother. She had listed herself as the beneficiary. She had signed documentation that my grandfather had verbally changed the designation before he died, something Rosaria said was completely false. She had been in the room when he signed those papers. He had been clear. The insurance company paid out, Rosaria told me, her voice careful and controlled. I don't know where the money went, but your mother got it. All of it. I sat on my kitchen floor. I don't know when I moved from the chair to the floor, but that's where I was when I processed what she was saying. $60,000. A third of what I'd sent them over 3 years. Money my grandfather had specifically designated for me and Fia, and my mother had claimed it, forged the change, and collected it without a word. Fia didn't know either. I called her the next morning. She's a nurse in Houston, no nonsense. The kind of person who responds to bad news by immediately asking what we're going to do about it. When I told her, she was quiet for a long moment. Then, send me everything Rosaria told you. I'm calling my union's legal resource line today. I went to Victor with everything. He put me in touch with a colleague who handled insurance fraud specifically. It turned out that fraudulent beneficiary claims, especially when the original documents were still on file at the insurance company, left a clear paper trail. We requested the original designation records. They were there. My mother's verbal change documentation didn't hold up against a signed paper from 4 years prior. This is fraud, Victor's colleague told me flatly. Potentially criminal. You and your cousin were defrauded of $30,000 each. Meanwhile, the other pressure hadn't let up. Theo showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Thursday night. I let him in because he'd never been aggressive, and I was curious what he'd say. He sat on my couch and looked at his hands for a while before he talked. Mom and Dad are really struggling, Elena, he said. The mortgage payment didn't go through. They might lose the house. I know, I said. They need you to reinstate the transfers. I know what they need, I said. Theo, did you know Mom collected Grandpa's life insurance? The policy that was meant for me and Fia? He blinked. What? I showed him the documentation. He read it slowly. When he looked up, his face had changed. Something had gone out of it. That can't be right, he said. But the certainty wasn't there. It's right, I said. Victor's colleague confirmed it. It's insurance fraud. He sat with that for a while. Then, quietly, what are you going to do? I'm going to let the process happen, I said. What I'm not going to do is send another dollar. He left without arguing. I wasn't sure what he'd do with the information, but that was his choice to make. I couldn't make it for him. What came next happened fast. Rosaria told me my parents had gone to her house that weekend, asking her to talk some sense into Elena. When Rosaria refused, my mom apparently called her a traitor to the family, said things about Rosaria's late husband that were genuinely cruel, and left with my dad in silence. Rosaria called me after, her voice steady, but I could hear something underneath it. I knew who they were, she said, but hearing it out loud is different. That same week, Victor sent a certified letter on my behalf to my parents, formally notifying them that all financial support had permanently ended, that I was pursuing the insurance fraud claim, and that any further contact of a threatening or harassing nature would result in legal action. A copy went to the insurance company's legal team. My mom's response was to call Fia. She told Fia I had poisoned her against the family, that the insurance thing was a misunderstanding that could be sorted out, privately, without lawyers. That Fia should convince me to drop it and come home. Fia, who is not someone to be handled, recorded the call with her state's consent laws and sent it to Victor. Victor added it to the file. About 2 weeks later, I got a call from someone at the Texas Department of Insurance. A fraud investigation had been opened based on our complaint and the documentation we'd submitted. They were thorough, asked me to provide every bank record I had, every piece of documentation about the transfers, the timeline of my grandfather's death, and the policy. I gave them everything. It felt like handing over 3 years of weight, one document at a time. The same week, I got a call from a detective at the Hays County Sheriff's Office. My parents had filed a complaint against me, claiming I had withheld funds I had contractually agreed to provide. There was, of course, no contract. Victor handled that call, and it went nowhere. But the fact that they'd tried it told me something important. They were cornered and making noise, the way people do when they have no real ground to stand on. Through all of this, Rosaria was the one who held steady. She'd call to check in, never to talk about the case, just to see how I was doing. She'd been the one adult in my family who had always seemed to actually see me. Not as a resource, not as the responsible one, just as a person. One afternoon, she drove to Austin, and we had lunch at a place near the rehab center. She brought a small package wrapped in tissue paper. Inside was an old recipe card in my grandmother's handwriting for her green chilla stew. She would have wanted you to have things, Rosaria said. Not just that one. I held the recipe card for a long time. My grandmother had died when I was 12. My parents hadn't talked about her much. And here was something of hers that Rosaria had simply held on to, waiting for the right moment. Victor called me on a Friday afternoon, 6 weeks after we'd filed everything. His tone was measured, which I'd learned meant something significant was coming. The insurance investigation had concluded. The original beneficiary designation had been authenticated. My mother's fraudulent claim documentation had been flagged. The insurance company was pursuing reimbursement of the full $60,000 and had referred the matter to the state attorney's office for criminal insurance fraud proceedings. What does that mean practically? I asked. It means your mother is looking at a felony charge, he said. Possibly your father too, depending on what they find about his involvement. It will take time, but the evidence is solid. I didn't feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. I felt the way you feel when something you'd been dreading for a long time finally arrives, and it's almost a relief, except the thing itself is still terrible. These were my parents, the people who had taught me to ride a bike in a grocery store parking lot and who used to let me fall asleep watching movies on the living room floor. Whatever they became later, whatever they chose. I didn't stop being someone who remembered that, but I also didn't stop being someone they had stolen from. Both things were true. The criminal case moved forward without me having to do much. Fia and I were witnesses, not prosecutors. Victor advised me to apply for victim compensation through the insurance recovery process, which I did. Several months later, Fia and I each received a partial reimbursement, not the full $30,000, but a substantial portion, issued by the insurance company as part of the fraud recovery. My parents lost the house, Without my transfers and with legal fees mounting, they couldn't cover the mortgage. They moved in with a distant relative in Corpus Christi. Theo told me. I didn't ask him to keep me updated. He just did, occasionally in short texts. I never responded with much. He'd made his own choices about where to stand, and I respected that even when it was hard. The thing about Theo was that he sent me a text one afternoon, several months after everything, that just said, I should have helped more. I know that now. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just replied, thank you, and left it there. Sometimes that's all there is. Fia and I used our recoveries differently. She put hers toward a down payment on a condo in Houston. Practical, immediate. Exactly what you'd expect from her. I put some of mine into a HBISA I'd been building slowly, added the rest to my student loan payoff fund, and finally booked the trip to Portugal I'd been moving to the back burner for 4 years because I was always sending money somewhere else. I went in October. I walked around Lisbon in the rain and ate pastéis de nata at a bakery that had been open since the 1830s and didn't check my bank account once. When I got home, I rearranged my apartment, moved a bookshelf, bought a plant, threw out some old things I'd been keeping out of guilt. I keep my grandmother's recipe card on the fridge now, held up by a magnet I bought at a market in Alfama. Every time I make her green chilla stew, which I've made 3 times since I got back, getting closer each time, I think about what it means to be passed something by someone who loved you, not because they needed something from you, just because you were worth it. I'm not estranged from the concept of family. I'm estranged from people who treated family like a transaction with one party doing all the paying. Those aren't the same thing. Rosaria calls every couple of weeks. Thea and I are planning to meet in San Antonio for the holidays. First time we've seen each other in person since the funeral 4 years ago that started all of this. Daniel and I are still together. Still slow, still figuring it out, which is how I prefer things now. Odessa came to the airport with me before Portugal and stood at the security line holding a paper bag with a breakfast taco and a travel-size bottle of SPF 50. Don't fall in love with a Portuguese guy and disappear, she said. I almost did, but that's a different story. The licensure plaque is on my office wall now. I look at it sometimes between patient sessions and think about the parking lot and the phone call and the cold thing that settled in me that night. I used to think of that moment as the beginning of a loss. Now I think of it as the beginning of something else, a life that belongs to me, paid for by no one but myself, answerable to people who actually show up. Setting limits with family isn't something you do because you stop loving them. Sometimes it's the only thing left to do because you finally started loving yourself enough to stop absorbing the damage. I learned that slowly, the way you learn most true things. Not in a moment, but across a long string of moments. Until one day you look around and realize the weight you've been carrying is no longer on your shoulders. It isn't. I used to think that loyalty was measured in sacrifice, that the more you gave, the more you proved you belonged somewhere. For 3 years I proved it every first of the month, $1,800 at a time, until there was almost nothing left of the person doing the proving. What I understand now, not from a book, not from a therapist's office, though both helped, is that actions compound. Not in a mystical sense, but in a plain, honest one. My parents built a life on extraction. Every time I sent that wire transfer without a receipt, without a thank you, without even a basic question about how my week had gone, I made it easier for the next ask to come. And they made it easier for themselves to stop seeing me as a person and start seeing me as a system that processed payments. That's not cruelty from the start. That's what happens when no one draws a line and the erosion just continues, quietly, month after month, until you look up and realize the ground you were standing on is gone. The insurance fraud was the thing that made it undeniable. My mother hadn't just taken from me in the ordinary way families sometimes do. She had taken from my grandfather's memory, from Fia, from the specific future he had imagined for us when he sat down and signed those papers. That's not a misunderstanding you work out over a difficult conversation. That's a choice, made deliberately, and then hidden. Choices like that have weight. They don't dissolve just because someone needs them to. What I keep coming back to is Rosaria. She had watched my mother for decades. She knew exactly who she was dealing with, and she called me anyway on a Tuesday evening, careful and steady, because she decided that the truth mattered more than keeping the peace. That took something. Not drama, not confrontation for its own sake, but a clear-eyed decision to do the harder right thing over the easier wrong one. I want to be that kind of person. The kind who calls. The kind who drives to Austin with a recipe card because someone deserves to have something that belonged to people who love them. The strength I found through this wasn't the kind that feels powerful in the moment. It felt more like clearing, like slowly removing things that had been blocking the light. Letting Victor handle the legal language. Letting Fia be furious alongside me. Letting Odessa hand me a breakfast taco at the airport without needing to explain everything again. Letting Daniel just be there. None of that is weakness. Learning to receive care from people who offer it freely. That's one of the harder things I've ever done, and I'm still practicing. I think about the parking lot a lot. The blazer, the phone. My mom's voice tight with irritation on the other end. I was 32 seconds away from going back inside and absorbing it, the way I always had. Something stopped me. I'm glad it did. Not because the path that followed was easy. It wasn't. But because every step on it was mine. Paid for by my own choices, my own courage, my own willingness to say, this is the line, and I'm not moving it. That's what I'd tell anyone standing in their own parking lot, phone in hand, trying to decide. The line doesn't draw itself. But once you draw it, you find out who you actually are. And sometimes, if you're lucky, you find out who else was standing in your corner the whole time, just waiting for you to let them in.